Reinventing Normal with Landini.
I'm Mark Landini, and you're listening to Reinventing Normal. It's a chat about innovation, innovative thinking, and the business of design and business. Today, I'm joined by Howard Saunders, a writer, speaker, retail futurist, and founder of the consultancy 22nd and 5th. He's helped some of the world's biggest brands reevaluate retail and navigate this brave new world that we find ourselves in. We sat down to discuss the relevance of department stores in an internet-enabled world, their general decline from imaginative curators to brand slaves, as well as the critical need for their reinvention and what that could look like. So let's get into it. Welcome, Howard.
Thanks, Mark. Great to see you after all these years. How is it on that side of the planet?
It's pretty good. We're discovering restaurants again.
It feels like, dare I say it, things are getting back to a certain sort of normal. A little bit of travel makes me feel like I have a purpose in life.
Well, travel from this part of the world's a lot harder because it's so much further. You really have to kind of plan for it. And we've got trips to America, Canada, the UK, Ireland, and a whole bunch of places in Europe.
Yes, it's still hard in certain places to travel at all or to get in. They make it very, very difficult. So, yeah, but, you know, things are slowly getting there. And I think we can show you the way in that, because I think you guys have suffered more than anyone.
No, we've been pretty good. I mean, Melbourne's, bragging about being the longest shutdown. But, you know, we're hoping it will get back to and reinvent its normal soon, start showing off about its coffee and, drinking coffee out of avocados. And
yes, it's exactly all they do.
How good its trams are, you know. And then we'll just have to say we got trams, but we call them ferries, and you know.
I've always struggled with Melbourne a bit. I know we mustn't get into too much of this, but it is just desperately trying to be the worst of the UK. You know, it's sort of desperately trying to be cynical, urban centre of London. They sort of raise their eyebrows, you know, as you wander into their coffee store. So yeah, I struggled a bit with it, but lovely place, Melbourne. Always loved it.
Yeah, no, we like Melbourne. So, listen, let's get into this chat, because what we're going to do is talk about department stores today and try and kind of glean some way forward for them, if indeed there is even one. We had this chat actually a while ago when we were invited to, if you remember, to advise an aging English department store on what they may or may not do in the future. Remember that?
I was in bed at the time, I think. You were,
It was kind of interesting, and we were surprised because we've never really been retail or rather department store specialists. In fact, we've only ever designed departments in department stores. So we were sort of surprised to be asked. But it kind of started us thinking about the relevance of a department store. And I even actually went to visit one, which I hadn't done for years.
Yes.
I'd kind of not really been inclined. That is, of course, apart from the wonderful Selfridges. But I guess what made me think was that, you know, do they actually have any, I guess this is my first question to you. What do you think their relevance is anymore? I mean, you know, given this internet-enabled world that we live in, where you can buy literally anything from anywhere in the world and have it delivered sort of in a nanosecond, they're not really big enough. So you know, are they literally a hostage to their leases, to their space, and to their recent history of being a place which seems to just house other people's brands?
The short answer is yes. And I've written about the death of the dinosaurs, and I've said many, many times, you know, the department store is dead. It kind of is, and we're seeing the fallout from that here in the UK with the House of Fraser and Debenhams and all the rest of it. But you have to look a bit deeper than that, and like you said, you've already mentioned Selfridges. Selfridges is an exception. It really is. And so that brings you to question what it is when you talk about a department store, what it is you mean. And, you know, as an urban, at the center of our you know, the center of our biggest city, there sits this enormous flagship, literally like a liner, a cruise liner with flags fluttering. You don't actually feel like you've been to the West End unless you've sort of boarded Selfridges and had a quick wander around to see what they're doing. So the power of that is tremendous, actually. And that's not sort of waned. In fact, I was there a couple of weeks ago before I went on traveling. And it looks fresh, you know, they've invested, they've got, I mean, the merchandising is amazing. So there are always exceptions to the rule. But, you know, if you mean, when you say department store, that funny little place with the double-barreled name in the middle of some godforsaken provincial town, yeah, it's finished for them. And yeah, but look, let me explain. When we say, I mean, we've lost it. They did it to themselves, didn't I? So, you know, you're waking me up. It's early morning here, and you're goading me. But it was suicide, really, wasn't it? They committed suicide by being so goddamn mediocre, and that they did it to themselves. And when the department store was invented, they were genuinely palaces, weren't they? Genuine, huge columns and finials and gold leaf and statues and all of that. And I'm just describing one or two. And Harrods versus Selfridges in London, and Bayenkopf, wherever you like to go, they were palaces. And then they morphed, didn't they? They gently got a little bit embarrassed, a little bit scared of what they were doing, and they tried to appeal to everybody, so they had ordinary stuff for everybody, and as a result, they faded away. So when we think of the likes of, well, you're allowed to talk ill of the dead, aren't you? And you know, you talk about Debenhams. We all know what we meant, don't we? I mean, it was 25 years dying, wasn't it?
It was a long, slow death.
It was really painful, and we all knew it. We probably joked about it at Fitch, you know, all those many moons ago.
Well, they were the people that reinvented it, but I don't know.
They did. They opened it up. They cut holes through it.
Yeah,
they did a damn good job, actually.
Yeah. I think they probably got a little bit carried away. I don't forget turning up the first day it opened and looking for the shirt department, and it had been cleverly renamed Collars and Cuffs, so it was under C as opposed to S on the list, which
that was probably me, wasn't it?
Oh, you weren't.
I didn't work on it. No, I didn't. But someone in my team probably did that, and I said, "Yeah, brilliant, collars and cuffs. Who wants to hear the word shirts?" No, you're right.
But I mean, I think what you touched on just then was Selfridges, and I think Selfridges is an icon for everyone. It still is.
Absolutely.
When it was invented, it actually broke a huge number of laws, in that it actually became an egalitarian place for lots of people to visit on a regular basis. It did things like, and I don't think many people know it, but I mean, it created the first cosmetic hall, which allowed you to actually touch and try on, as opposed to have handed to you, you know, products that were normally hidden away in drawers. You know, I think they even invented the mannequin. They had a rifle club on the roof for women. They had public lavatories, which had never appeared before in retailing. They had a library, they had restrooms, they had things that the great unwashed were previously kind of banned from using. But they also had a dollar, you know, they had a dollar basement where they sold, you know, really cheap stuff as well. But the main difference, in my view, what department stores used to do, and I think when you reinvent history, you can actually look backwards and see whether or not something that was a good idea has been forgotten, was that they used to actually be merchants. And what they did was they, you know, pre-internet, pre-global travel, pre-going to Ibiza for the weekend, they used to travel the world and find stuff that no one else had. And they used to bring that stuff back, and they were a kind of, you know, discovery channel, if you like, for the masses. And it was a really, it was an exciting place to go physically, because, as you say, they had, you know, architecture that no one else had experienced in their homes. But more importantly, they actually had stuff that no one else could find. And it just seems to me that they forgot that somewhere in the 70s when it became far too easy to just fill the place, lease the space or license the space to international brands. And at that point, they stopped being curators and were just shopping centers. Interested to get your take on that.
Well, I'm kind of agreeing with all of that. There's a thing that I remember. I don't know if I even discussed it with Rodney years ago, but is that Selfridges liberated women. This is an incredibly important thing. Okay, so I love the sort of hidden history. So if I show you, I know we're going on off piste. I love the fact when I was talking to my son about these pictures, whatever, Victorian pictures, and I said, but what you forget when you look at your great grandfather, your grandfather, is they were fucking cold. They were always cold. You don't see that in the picture. You can't see it in the picture, you see. And it's the same with Selfridges. When you look at people walking around, they weren't cold. In fact, they were warm. It was all gas lit. And it was a space for women. Basically, middle class and upper class women weren't allowed out of the house without a chaperone. That's a fact. They weren't. They didn't wander the streets going into, but that didn't exist. The servants went out and did all that food shopping and buying the sheets and everything else. And they create what Gordon Selfridge did, created this palace that was safe and warm and illuminated, and he fixed prices so they didn't have to haggle and negotiate like previously in the market stall. So it's created this incredible, I mean, I hate the word, but safe space for women. And suddenly women became this generation of shoppers, of consumers, and that's new. So you're absolutely right. The beauty counter invented there, pretty much. There are various takes on that, and it allowed women to go out on their own, middle class, posh women. So I think, actually, I know we love this egalitarian thing. I'm going to be a little bit less PC than you. I think it's the democratization of the place that sort of that it's its problem, or the democratization of department stores that's part of the problem. You know, as House of Fraser and Debenhams or whatever slowly tried to appeal to everybody, they appealed to no one. And there was no one out there that felt that there was anything secret to find there at all. Once, back in the day, your grandmother, yes, grandmother would be fair enough, wouldn't it? Could have pulled up alongside, parked her car outside, wandered in to the leather goods counter, and they'd have said, "Good morning, Mrs. Landini." They'd remember her name, and they'd have pulled out her glove size, and she could have tried on the gloves and walked out. I mean, it's kind of an amazing world we had back then, but it was posh. It wasn't egalitarian, actually. It was middle class and upper class, posh women going out, having a nice time. The equation I want, I don't have the answer to this. The equation I want to know is, if back in the day there were a few hundred customers popping in and being called Mrs. Landini and trying gloves on, and also housing all the managers in purpose-built homes around in the area, how the hell did they make any money? Whereas now we've got millions pouring in. This is egalitarianism. Millions pouring in, buying shit they don't need, and still it's difficult to break even. And they own the freehold, but that's another whole conversation.
Don't you think? I mean, I still think that in those days, irrespective of the fact that I used to greet when he came in, I mean, my mother was greeted every day when we went to buy groceries at the local Cullins, and they did things that people now consider to be, you know, exceptional. As you say, they recognized her. They asked her if she wanted credit before a credit card had even been invented. They said she would put that on the slate, or would like to pay cash. They asked her when she wanted it, if they'd like someone to help her take it to their car. I think they call that click and collect now.
Yes.
Or would she prefer to have it delivered by the boy on a bike at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, if that was convenient? So, I mean, all of those things that actually happened in those days still happen today. It's just that they're enabled by the internet.
Yes, we need an app for it now. You know, we need artificial intelligence and facial recognition software so that it comes up on a screen. Mrs. Landini.
Yeah, I mean, you can do that. You could actually recognize people.
Oh, they do.
It's perfectly feasible for a stranger or someone you don't even recognize to walk into a store and be recognized, and the person who greets them to say their name. I mean, one of the reasons why I like a hotel that I stay in New York regularly is that actually, even if I haven't been there for a year, the doorman says, "Mr. Landini, how the are you?" Sorry, we're on American TV, so I nearly.
Oh, I've already sworn. I don't know. I'm English. It's an old word.
But that's actually one of the primary reasons why I go back to that hotel, because I feel welcomed and I feel greeted. And you know, you're not felt like that anymore in a department store. In fact, actually, if you can find someone to serve you, you know, you're lucky.
Exactly. When I was thinking about this last night, I was thinking, the phrase came into my head, the sort of, are you being served without the service? You know, we sort of built these places with the Mrs. Slocums and all the rest of it, and then they were told not to serve you anymore. And you would it sort of became this sort of hybrid of a supermarket. You're just wandering around aisles of folded pajamas wrapped in dusty polythene. And that was what sort of department stores became. I mean, it's astonishing, really. That's suicide.
I mean, on one level, you probably needed the service. I mean, I don't want to talk about the history too much, but I mean, on one level, you needed the service because a lot of the stuff that was there, you didn't know even was there. You went there to find stuff that you didn't know even existed. Whereas what department stores seem to have come are places that you know, or in fact get disappointed when you think something might be there and they're out of stock. So, you know, your expectations have changes from a place of discovery and excitement and invention to a place where it's really just a delivery channel, which can be bettered by, you know, an out-of-town warehouse run by Amazon. So
yeah, I would always think that if you stop someone in the street and said, again, I'm speaking ill of the dead, but if you said, oh, there's a new Debenhams just opening around the corner, what do you think it looks like? What are you talking to me for? Well, you know, just tell me what you think. Well, they could have drawn the fucking thing, couldn't they? They could just go, well, this is it. You go in, there's a beauty hall, there's a miserable looking girl sitting on the counter there. There's at the back, there's a, you know, then there's the pajamas and there's the thing. It's like, you could have guessed it. Whereas if actually even today, if you said, oh, there's a branch of Selfridges opening in your local town, what do you think it looks like? You have no bloody idea. You know, they could do anything. That's kind of crudely, you know, where Selfridges sits, they can still give us
I think
joy.
Still, well, I mean, it still does curate. I mean, you know, it started with the Wonder Room a few years ago, which was, you know, has now grown to the whole floor. It has regularly changes. I think it's got the corner store on the corner of Oxford Street and is it Duke Street? Which, you know, regularly has, you know, installations and launches new products. But it also has brands that I didn't know existed. You know, if I go around the menswear department, the last time I was there, I found French brands that someone had discovered that I didn't know about, that I didn't know that I could find there. I didn't even know that I was looking, to be honest. But someone had actually done the work for me and introduced me to something new, which is essentially the idea of what department stores were in the first place. So I guess this idea of curation is something which is central. And for me, that's what department stores have perhaps forgotten, which is the notion of actually finding things for you and surprising you with them.
You faded away a little bit on that little technical thing. But I get your drift. Yes, curation. I think that, you know, I don't want to go on about past, although the past does shine a light. You have to understand the past. And I think the point of understanding that Selfridges, to go on about it relentlessly, was posh and highly curated, displaying, you know, the riches that they discovered from around the world. That's the bit that was lost. That's the very bit that we need. And that's the very bit that you could actually bring back today. A bit highly curated, so you know that it's cool and relevant. Yes, is there a place for that? Damn right there is.
Well, I mean, I think that's my point. Given that that you can get anything from anywhere now online, and that we're all trained to do that, there isn't really a day out to be had anymore. And you know what I'm seeing is if you think about what's going to happen to Oxford Street, let's stick with London for the time being. What's going to happen to all those stores? Well, we know that Topshop, which was an institution, has been bought by IKEA, and that's now going to become, well, let's see what it's going to become, but it's not going to be Topshop anymore. That won't be quite as much of a day out as perhaps, well, maybe it will.
Just flat pack clothing.
A flat pack day out. Let's go and buy a flat pack today. But I'm just wondering whether or not that kind of whole community thing can be re-engendered, because my mother and my sister and myself we were lucky enough to be driven to places like Harrods, and we'd visit Way Inn, and that was a really exciting place to go. You know, it was this little kind of magical place which was accessed by only one special lift with flashing lights in it at the top of a department store, and no daylight could be seen from it.
I've forgotten those words. Well done. Way In.
Yeah.
Thank
you remember it?
Did you park outside Harrods?
Well, no. In those days, we I have to admit, we had a chauffeur, and my mother. It was
Excellent.
She used to say to him, Freddie, I'll be half an hour. Just start circling in about 45 minutes. And he literally used to go and park around the corner and shine the car with all the other chauffeurs. And then after 45 minutes, he would circle around, and eventually we would wave at him if we came out, which was never 45 minutes later. It would be an hour or two or even 3 sometimes. But yeah, that was our method. It was
well,
I've
got. We are getting nostalgic, but I think we're allowed that. Sorry, but I used to live on Oxford Street. I used to live in Hamway Street. I think you remember that, a flat in the I told you about before Fitch. And my parents came to visit, and this is the mid 80s. I know this is sort of Jurassic period, and my dad drove to London, obviously, and he said, let's go to Harrods. And he said, well, drive. And I said, don't be ridiculous, Dad. You can't drive, not in London. He said, I'll be fine. He said, absolutely. And we drove to Harrods, and we pulled up right at the doors, and the guy opened the car door, and we parked there. That was in the 80s. We've forgotten that you could actually sort of access places like that. Now there's just more and more of us, but things aren't getting better. This is the bit going back to that financial equation, the economic equation that is Selfridges or anywhere else. How come that doesn't work? You've got hundreds and thousands more people pouring in. You've already paid, you got the freehold. How the hell doesn't it work that we could bring back some of that?
Well, I guess, I mean, you know, I guess that kind of comes back to that idea that now I've forgotten. Oh yeah, the whole notion of awe, you know, and joy. Yes. And discovery. Do you think that I mean, we've been talking a lot about history and celebrating our memories of you know, our childhoods and when we used to enjoy going to places like that. Are there going to be places like that in the future? Are they the Nike towns, you know, the Nike worlds? That I don't know if you've seen that new one that's open in Paris. That seems to me to be a sort of dopamine hell, where, you know, rather than actually. Oh
yeah, yes is the answer. Yes, to all of that. Of course it is, and I think that look, we've got, you know, this. Look, you know, I do my things, but this little thing here, it was quite big actually. Changed everything. So it's not internet really, it's the idea, and I say a lot of stuff, but fire, wheel, smartphone. I really mean that. You know, it's fundamental. You've suddenly got, as I call God, great overlord of data, in your pocket. Everyone has God in their pocket, and that's access to the sum of all human knowledge in their pockets right now. Access to everything that was ever written, ever said, ever photographed, it's in here. And that's an astonishing accomplishment, isn't it? The idea that, oh yeah, what a store's going to look like after the internet, now that we can get Amazon. Then that's not the point. You've got this little device that knows everything, and you can double check everything, and you can check the TikTok generation. Wow. I mean, I don't know if you use TikTok. I do. And it's just firing my own little echo chamber, acceptably. It's just firing shit back at me like this, firing, boom, enough of that, boom, boom, boom. You've got, how are you going to compete in awe with that? This little device, your little God, firing all that stimuli, all that dopamine at you, yeah, it's gonna have to turn up a notch, isn't it? It's got to move on from the dusty department in Debenhams, isn't it? Just a notch. Christ. So yes, there will be spaces and places that do that, and I think could be very exciting. It will be very exciting. Do you know what they're doing? So here's the thing, because I like to be practical. So I know you're a cynical bastard. Do you know what they're doing at Tottenham Court Road?
I don't know what they're doing in Tottenham Court Road. They've shut all their camera shops.
Yeah. What they're doing Tottenham Court Road at the tube station and behind it into Denmark Street is astonishing. It's called the outer net. You can have a look at it. And I think this sets the tone for the future. So Denmark Street is the old sort of London's Tin Pan Alley. There's been a huge fight about you can't develop that because Jimi Hendrix was there. Jimi Hendrix stole a guitar, or whatever, his Mick Jagger, whatever. They all did their stuff in that grotty little street. So don't touch it, whatever you do. But the developers are very smart. And what they've done is they've built a 2,000-seat venue beneath the street.
Oh, yeah, I heard about it.
I haven't seen it. Okay, it's not finished yet. The Denmark Street buildings themselves are turning into a hotel with the Jimi Hendrix room, and the Johnny Rotten room is just sort of vomit on the walls and swear words written there. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Sweet, actually. It's a full suite. And there's a studio. It's accessible to the public, supposedly. It will be. So you can wander off the street with your stolen guitar and say, I want to have a little session in here. And then on the top of Tottenham Court Road tube station, there's a box. And this box is open. I mean, it's not built, so let me just, I'm describing it from the visuals, okay? So a box with LED screens on all sides, visible from the street, which will be used as a launch venue for stuff. And it'll be a completely immersive space selling stuff. So instead of it being always, I don't know, fashion, beauty, now it can be soap powder, it could be anything that you want to shout about. And that kind of gives us a clue. So instead of the high street thinking, oh my God, what are we going to do with all these boxes? You're going to have to think more laterally about maybe their venues, their spaces for launches, much more flexible, entrepreneurial spaces. Certainly in our local towns, we're going to need that little pop-up spaces and guys starting stuff, launching stuff. We need flexible leases. I don't want to get into the solution to all this, but you're getting a glimpse of it. So yeah, immersive spaces that take us on a little journey that tells you how amazing soap powder is. Or have you seen the Van Gogh thing that's going around? Completely immersive. You walk through this exhibition, there's no paintings, no Van Gogh paintings. You're in the paintings, you're up the brush strokes of this big, and you're sucked into the damn thing, and you come out crying, I love Van Gogh, I always did. I always loved him. Because they've just immersed you in him with the music building up and the story and that is a glimpse of the future. Those immersive spaces that make you fall in love with stuff. So yeah, are they going to be dopamine focused little bubbles of stuff happening up and down the high street? Damn right, there is, certainly in our urban centers. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's an interesting thing, and because a lot of people really just are talking about what will become of department stores. I guess what you're saying in some respects is that maybe it's really a question of whether they're relevant anymore, because actually they exist, they have a portfolio of space, they have X thousand square meters, in each location, whether that location is local to your community or, a destination which you visit. Currently, what the people who own those businesses are trying to do is work out how to fill them up. Yes. With product, right? Yes, now, exactly. Do you think that they can do that? Or do you think that that's just a redundant idea and that they should really just be thinking about what to do those spaces in another way? Or should they just lease them to these events that you've been talking about? Because it seems to me that if you actually get a street full of events, then that's as dull as a street just full of product, right? what you're not doing is actually creating something that was there, and in my view is really important, which is actually a community. Because one of the things that you can't do online, and one of the things you can't do when you're in some sort of immersive event, is actually have a conversation. You can't actually hug someone. You can't smell them in virtual reality. You can't actually meet someone on the corner of an experience and wait for them. You don't need to anymore anyway.
Well, I'm jumping ahead here, but I did think, you know, they talk about the metaverse. There's a lot. I've just come back from a conference and they can't stop talking about the metaverse. And you know what I mean when I say that, don't you? Because I'm not trying to be smart or anything, but the virtual reality universe in which brands can inhabit and do whatever they want, because you can build anything. You can build a giant underwater inside out dinosaur that spews Louis Vuitton bags into your, of course you can, anything can be in the metaverse. And I just thought in my cynical contrarian brain, how empty and meaningless that is, you know, for a generation, that millennial generation that want to remove our heritage. They want to banish history. They want to demolish the patriarchy and everything that went with it. And they want to live in a metaverse that has no umbilical connection to history or heritage, with no architecture, because it lives in the virtual world. I thought it's perfect for them, actually, and that it's an empty, meaningless void of dopamine. Yes. So I'm agreeing with you on that level, but it's never like that. And it's not a panacea. It's you know, the future is messy. That's another one of my things. It's mixed. So when I say events, you can't say, oh yeah, well, all those boxes are full of events. Well, that's boring as well. It's never like that. It's a bit of both, isn't it? As you get to Oxford Circus and what IKEA are going to do, yeah, it better be entertaining, I say. And then on the back of it, maybe there should be a lovely little coffee shop and a place where you hang out and chill, and before you move on to the next brand that wants to tell you something. Yeah, I think it's exciting, actually. I think that's our urban centres. I mean, I know I'm trying to, you know, rush ahead here.
No, I actually want to take you back before you move away from that. I mean, what I said to you earlier on with department stores is that I think they stopped being merchants, they stopped being curators, they stopped having an opinion about stuff, whether it was society and, as Selfridges says, you know, about the liberation of women and shopping and blah, 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 blah. They stopped having opinions, and they actually gave way to brands and allowed brands to express their opinions, whether it was by actually giving 300 square meters to Hugo Boss or whatever. Now, I guess what I think you're saying is that through the use of technology in the metaverse, whatever you want to call it, that the brands are becoming so dominant that that's really all we're being influenced by.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Is there an opportunity to actually go back to the future and actually, I mean, particularly with England, okay? I mean, we've been talking a lot about England, and you guys have just left the European Union, which is complete madness. And I know you've been talking about it for several years, so you're probably bored with it. But you can't get goods anymore. You can't get lorry drivers.
No, listen, you don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. That's a hiccup. And anyway, I'm a futurist. I don't sit down here in the dirt.
So yeah, so my question is, do you think the future could be about, I was listening to a podcast today on the way over here, and it's called The Dopamine Culture. And it's a book that's recently been released by a woman that was involved in, well, she's a psychologist rather. And she talks basically about addiction. And she says that, you know, we are all addicted now. This society that we live in, this world that we live in, is more addicted than any other society ever known to mankind. And it's largely through the use of that thing that you held up a minute ago. Do you think that by breaking that addiction, we could actually create a better universe for us to live in? Because you've painted this universe of virtual reality, and to me that sounds like a really cold place to be in, and it's not certainly one that I want to. I don't want to live in it. I'm happy not to, and I can choose not to. But many people are not educated to know that there is another option. Do you think there's a viable option? Do you think that if one was to fill towns up with stuff that the towns made, or that was sourced locally, or that was actually of some different value or based on some different values. So for example, if you look, all department stores have a store in Birmingham. Selfridges has a place in Birmingham. They have one in Manchester. They have one in London. Now, Manchester and Birmingham are very, very different places to London. Sheffield is a very different place to Manchester. Coventry is a very different place to Sheffield. Do you think there's an opportunity to, do you think nationalism, which has been on the rise politically, of course, globally since, for some time now, and particularly in Europe, do you think nationalism may play some role in the reinvention of products and produce? Because it seems to me that we talk a lot about plastic bags and the ocean being full of those, and everyone's very careful to actually make sure that their supermarket has a little recycling area in it. But that's not going to solve the problem. What's going to solve the problem, I think, is us not all wanting to have 30 pairs of trainers in our cupboard, but to have one or two or enough. So so that goes back to curation. I firmly, sorry?
No, I'm agreeing with you. I just don't want to launch into a whole thing on sustainability because it's so intellectually porous that it's beneath me. But
But you think it's intellectually porous. I mean, I think it's intellectually porous in the way that actually people are using it to qualify themselves as active in it. But the world is burning up. And I remember once you went off on a rant when we were at Fitch years ago, and you were complaining that there weren't enough grown-ups in the room. I don't know if you can remember that. It was at one of our board meetings, and you said something.
Well, I was 22 at the time.
Yeah, okay, but you were recognizing that people were behaving childishly, that the grown-ups were behaving childishly, and they weren't behaving like grown-ups. Is there an appropriate time for grown-ups to actually take, or someone to take control and actually have an alternative vision? Because at the moment, what this millennial generation that you refer to seems to embrace everything that is thrown at them. And that by not embracing it, their peers consider them to be behaving inappropriately. Surely at some point, someone has to curate, and some grown-up, some benign dictator, which essentially is what Mr. Selfridge was, should actually take the role of leader and say, look, okay, that's fine, you can do that. And as you say, not everything's going to be the same. But is there an opportunity for someone to have a vision again, for someone to say, actually, there's another way of doing this? And I cite, I think, probably before I finish my rant, Aldi as an example of that. If you think about Aldi started as a corner store. The two brothers of or rather two children of the woman that started it took it over, and they've turned it into this massive global business. But what's interesting about Aldi is that it actually doesn't waste anything. If you go to Aldi, there's only one can of baked beans, or possibly two. One might be organic. There's only one or two different types of washing powder. There's only one or two different types of shampoo. They've actually taken the time to curate. They've taken the time to source. They have an opinion about the products that they sell, and they sell it to you at a really, really reasonable price. And they actually work on all those other things that are to do with sustainability, such as power and energy and all that kind of stuff. They do that rather quietly. Do you think there's an opportunity for department stores or retailers generally to actually start thinking more sensibly about what they sell and having values attached to it, which aren't probably politically embraced at the moment? Or do you think that's not the job of retail at all?
You've just fired a load of stuff at me. And so let's take, I didn't want to go down the sustainability route, but the idea that you produce, when I go into Marks and Spencer's and have to pay for a plastic bag that kills a dolphin or whatever, that to buy a set of some prawns in a prawn-shaped plastic dome, that's what I mean by intellectually porous. I mean, they're playing a game, aren't they? They want you to buy more and more shit. Sorry, but that's the word for it. They want you to buy it. And you go in at Christmas, there's little dinky wind up pieces of nonsense from China. That's M&S. That's the plan A, because there is no plan B. Selling you more and more shit, wanting to sell you more and more shit, just like Aldi, they want to sell you more and more shit. The idea that, oh no, we've done now, we've got enough stuff. You've got enough t-shirts to last you a lifetime. Pass them down to your children. I nearly swore again. Pass them down and they can pass them down. We don't need any more stuff. So clearly that's a ridiculous argument. The idea that we go, yeah, well, that's fine. We've got enough stuff. What we need is a retailer that acknowledges that. No. However, is it important to understand the guilt wave that clearly you're in as well, dare I say, but we won't go in too much depth about that. But we feel guilty. So palaces of consumerism are slightly offensive. So no, we won't be building giant gold leaf columns like Gordon Selfridge, celebrating consumerism, because we feel a little bit gretted by it, don't we? We feel a little bit cowed by it, a little bit guilty. However, go and have a look at what they're doing in Beijing. And I wanted to mention to you, I don't know if you know it, if you do, well done, SKPS. Have a look at the SKPS department store. So amazing. So they're not cowed by it. They're not guilted by it. They've gone back to consumerism. It's an amazing art gallery installation of consumerism brought to the 21st century. Basically, do you know the brand Gentle Monster?
Yeah.
Which is those freaky little shops, don't they? The spectacle shops where they pile of dirt in the center of the shop because it's sort of installation, it's arty nonsense. The guys from SKP said, we want to do, see, I like bringing you facts, stuff that you don't know. The guys from SKP said, who the hell did those designs those shops? Well, it turns out it's the in-house team. So they said, right, we want you, the in-house team, along with another company, I believe, to design our special SKP. So it's SKPS. It's just opened in Beijing. It's astonishing. In other words, released from guilt about doing stuff, things start to happen again. We're in the West, we're riddled with it. With the actually consumption's a bad thing. You're in on it. You're saying, well, maybe we shouldn't have so much, maybe we should have retailers selling us less stuff. I mean, it's nonsense. Of course it is. I mean, it doesn't stand up to any rigor at all, but that doesn't mean that the public aren't asking for it. So yes, we have to build more sustainable retail that looks like it. I'll get you off the hook on this, by the way. It's not a cul-de-sac. We have to build more sustainable, more shit that's packaged up. And the idea, sorry, just to finish my rant, the idea that the planet does accounts, and it says that, I had this in Ibiza actually, and that by not doing something, it's better. So God is looking down and going, oh, brilliant, they didn't do that. It's better than what it could have been. So I told these developers, I said, why don't you develop these whole cities, giant cities with glass domes and copper wiring and all the shit that goes into a city, and then tell them you're not going to build it and you get an award for not doing it. I mean, this is this weird upside down world. The planet does not do accounts. If you make one tin of beans today, that's one extra. It isn't like one less than last year because when we did 3 cans, doesn't matter. That's 4 cans. That's how it works. So don't get me down the sustainable route because it's nonsense. It has to be, and I'll take anyone on it. Okay, but that's
for a man who regularly tweets articles from the Daily Telegraph. I think I could have predicted your response to that.
Yeah,
but...
good, because I'm a consumerist and a capitalist, and it's how society got rich, and it's how society got engaged again. I mean, that's how we get. As soon as we started selling shit to each other, we got rich. But your generations of your family were poor until this came along, and now we're all guilty about it. Hey, this is another whole subject. But
okay, so let's get you off
the hook. I'll get you off the hook.
Are you going to get me off the hook? Right?
Yes. How do you assuage? How do you salve that guilt? How do you do that on that thing that you talked about? Nationalism was a better word for it. It's a gentler word called localism, and localism is massively on the rise. So yes, in my local town, I expect a department store has got the chance, if it brings us local stuff. Why does it get us off the guilt thing? They're still making shit. They're still making stuff out of plastic and wood, wood's trees, by the way. I thought I'd mention that. You know, they're still making stuff. How does it get us off the hook? Well, because we're nurturing our local community. And that's the little key to success. So in other words, if we bring in localism, we feel like we're nurturing and investing in our local community, in our local area, and that's a good thing. So you're seeing already the rise of localism in retail. It's a good thing. It's exciting. Back to the future. Very much.
Well, I mean, it was interesting that you were knocking Melbourne earlier on, because
that was a writing.
You know, and indeed, you know, the English high street, which I think is what you're sort of touching on, perhaps, has been decimated by the capitalist society that you're embracing, and what you're sort of in a country way, it seems to me, suggesting is that it would be nice to actually go back to that local thing. And I agree with you. I think there's nothing better than being recognized by Fred the butcher or Sue the the florist. That whole sense of community. And I think for me, local actually is about community, and it's about actually knowing the name of your next door neighbor and the name of the person that's making the pork pie that you buy. And there isn't a city on the planet, actually, I don't think, that does that better than Melbourne. And he's enormously proud about it.
Yeah, good. I take.
And there are, you know, one of the things that many of our clients that come from overseas are in awe of when they come to places like Melbourne is that there are no large chains. There are no, or very few, apart from in shopping centres, large chains in high streets. There are lots and lots and lots and lots of very, very rich coffee owners or coffee makers or florists or greengrocers. There aren't the chains. True. It doesn't mean to say that they're not making money, but they're actually doing something which is unique.
No, I've always, listen, I don't want to get on Melbourne. I was a wry joke about them. Sometimes you go into the coffee shops, there's too cool for school. That's all. I've had some of the best food on the planet in Melbourne. So let me just be clear about that. And yes, they're not inundated by the copycat, the cookie cutter brands that we got tired of. And I agree with you. That's a good thing. But that's not capitalism. It's one version of it. But it's just as powerful to bring in local brands, and that's what we look for, isn't it? We want to buy, it's a very interesting debate. This is a bit more of a dinner party debate, but you want to buy things that are made locally. You might buy your knives that are made locally, for instance, or you certainly want produce that's local, but you don't want your laptop made locally, do you? And you don't really, yeah, Bob did it. What's wrong with that? Oh, it's all right. Buy two, get one free. You don't want that, but nor do you want your makeup, I'm assuming, your cosmetics made locally, by some kind. Yeah, no, she made it fresh this morning. It's all fresh yogurt in there. So lovely. You don't want that either. But there is an awful lot we do. And wouldn't it be nice if we could bring that back? And I think I don't have to wish it. It is happening. And one of the wonders of lockdown, by switching the valve off, switching it off, so that we're stuck at home having our ankles photographed 3 times a week by the DPD man. It was sort of meaningless, actually. And what we did, once they switched the valve out, because they kept switching ours on and off. I don't know, yours is slightly different.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, so suddenly it goes on, and the currency of the names, I know you've read my thing, but it's beautiful. So I feel it. You hold the little, remember his name's Bob. Remember his name's Bob, because it's useful to you. And then you go back to the butcher and say, hi, Bob. And that is a beautiful moment. And we're all the same. This is the thing. This is the thing I say about retail. Let's say a lot about retail. But, if we talked politics, which we touched on just then, we would disagree. If we talk about art, we'd disagree. If we talk about literature, film, we'd disagree. But if we talk retail, our town centres, our city centres, we kind of all want the same thing. That is the beauty. And so why don't we just go and get it? We want that mix of the big brand showing off and the little artisan coffee shop. We want all of that. We want the little local girl who's supported by H&M because it's a little incubator they're building and she's a young designer that's helping launch. We all want the same thing. Let's make it happen.
So I mean, I think the difference is potentially that when you seem to talk about brands, you seem to think about brands that exist as opposed to brands that perhaps could exist. And I guess my question to you and to people who are thinking about filling up these spaces with product is that, are there brands that currently don't exist that could exist that are potentially more local? I mean, I think of, say, Hackett, for example, which became a very large brand. It started as a little corner store selling secondhand clothes on the New King's Road. I don't know if you remember that. Years ago. It used to be
I do.
Yeah, and that became a global brand, and it had a story attached to it.
Mm.
Do you think that there may be the emergence of more global brands that are based in local stories, or a different type of storytelling to the stories that we're used to hearing? And do you think people want to hear those stories? I mean, you talked about cosmetics, right? But Burt's Bees, which is owned by Clorox, which is one of the world's biggest companies, was started by a woman.
True. There's always exceptions.
Making beeswax into.
Yeah, no, I hadn't planned that little rant. It just came out, and I thought, well, what? It's just because I can't just say laptops and iPhones made locally. But I thought, yeah, cosmetics is kind of global and it works better. But yeah, there are always exceptions. You trouble with the local iPhone maker slightly more. But yes, I mean, as a futurist, most brands haven't happened yet. I'm a brand guy. Of course they haven't. I mean, we've barely begun. The idea that we've sort of peaked at history. Every age thought it was the peak, and it was sort of downward from then on. Every single age does. Every single age, incidentally, thinks that it's peak population and that we're heading for hell. Every single age thinks the same thing. The truth is...
So what do you think about travel, Howard? I mean, I know that you travel a lot. As do we, right? And whenever I travel to a new city, what I always do is try and find some part of that city that isn't visited by the tourists, and you know, sometimes you find it the first time, sometimes, as with Seoul, for example, it took me about 20 trips before I started discovering something that I didn't expect to see or didn't expect to find. Do you think that perhaps, I mean, going back to, I mean, I call it nationalism, but going back to focus, perhaps going back to curation, the centre of London could be full of things that were designed or made or conceived in London? I mean, Harrods and Selfridges have failed miserably over the last few years because of travel, because they're becoming incredibly reliant on tourism and tourists. But if you were, for example, to say, well, let's turn the centre of London into a place that is that only sells things, or to put a department store that only sells things that are made in England, of which there are, okay, maybe they've got a floor selling iPhones, but let's put the iPhone floor aside. What about having a department store that was so focused and so well curated that it only sold things from one country, or one town, or one place?
I think there's room for all of that. There's room for all of that. Like I say, the future's messy. Now, the best example I have that pops into my head is Fortnum's, actually, who are on a bit of a roll at the moment. And they had a floor with menswear. Men's wasn't fashion. There was some fashion. But there was leather goods and accessories and bits of nonsense, all made locally, all made in London. Ish, certainly all UK based. So there were leather goods makers from Shoreditch and all of that. And I thought that was a real breath of fresh air. Yes, of course, there's a place for that. And as more and more people travel, I mean, when you go to Berlin, you want to buy something from Berlin, don't you? You don't want to.
When I went to Russia recently, I wanted to buy a Russian army watch because I knew that I couldn't find one anywhere else, right? I didn't manage to do that because I was too busy working. But I just think that there perhaps might be an opportunity for new brands to emerge, which are based on local. I mean, you know, we all celebrate the local high street. We all celebrate, as your article touched on, you know, being recognized by name. But the charm of the market, the charm of actually going somewhere to find something that probably exists already, but actually hasn't been put together as a collection. I mean, you touched on Tottenham Court Road. It used to be a place where you go and buy a camera. It was the only place in London to buy a camera because there was 1,300 camera stores there. It was a very heavily curated street that actually became a destination in its own right for a very, very narrowly focused subject matter. And I'm wondering whether or not that the subject matter hasn't, as you touched on really, really early on, has just got so egalitarian, so unposh, so unfocused that it's just boring and it's mundane. And therefore it's been covered up with, this mundaneness has been covered up with these sort of dopamine-driven exercises of 5-second ecstasy, a quick ride on a go-kart, virtually.
Yeah, the competitive socializing is the big thing, isn't it?
Yeah, well, in fact, actually, there could be, through curation, through grown-ups in retail, actually having a vision. So it gets me on to my last thing, because you know, a lot of people think you're a visionary, right? So we want to hear from the visionary. Do you think there will be more visionaries in retail in the next few years? And if you do think there are, where do you think they're going to come from? Because at the moment, particularly with say department stores, with large businesses, they seem to be focused so much inwardly that there isn't anyone that can actually have a world vision, as Mr. Selfridge did himself when he started Selfridges. Where do you think that vision is going to come from, or do you not think it's going to happen at all?
That is a terrible question, isn't it? Terrifying question. It's a hard question. I would say that 2,000 years, I've said this before, this bit, 2,000 years ago, we wandered into the center of town wrapped in a bed sheet. And well, your ancestors did. And they wandered around and they had a look and they sniffed a candle and squeezed a courgette. And then they sat down and they had a glass of wine or a coffee or something similar and wandered back. They met a colleague, they met their mother, their brother, or a friend. And they stood at the bar and they chatted and you know, shared a story with a fellow wine drinker and wandered back. And in 2,000 years' time, we will be doing something very similar. So those things are written in our DNA. Humans are a social species. So yes, of course, the question is, what is it that's going to attract you to the town centre? It might shift a bit, but not an awful lot, actually, because once you've had a squeezed a courgette for a couple of minutes, which is a bit weird, actually, but once you've done that for a bit, you do kind of tend to head for a coffee or a glass of wine, and we always will. It's a funny thing how we think we've reached peak history and that suddenly we're all going to be living in glass bubbles. But there's a clue. So there's a thought that's just entered my head. So who on Earth, on planet Earth, which godlike figure could bring us that vision? And it's Jeff, isn't it? It's Jeff. Jeff, he has to do it. Instead of spending all his bloody money going up 60 miles off the planet's surface, because this idea of space, I just want to bring that into reality for you because I love doing reality checks. It's barely, I think it's max 160 miles or something. You know, it's really not that adventurous. This is a billionaire roller coaster. That's what he's building. So but you imagine if he put his energy into what he really believes, into Jeff, do a Gordon Selfridge, build us a 21st century palace, a curated palace of the best of Amazon. Wow. And that, because I've got to take, because I know you want to rush me off, I've got to do my little bit about the ego graphics. It's my word. I'm allowed to make up words. So previously, marketeers talked about demographics. Demos being populace, people, graphics being picture. So they made rough pictures. They'd say, oh, our store's aimed at 20-year-olds, 20 to 26, 20-year-olds that are interested in travel and all that. That was demographics. Now, when you click on your Amazon page, it knows exactly who you are. That's what I call ego graphics. It's not generalizing about you. It knows exactly. And that will be the next stage that penetrates, that trickles down into the real world. So you can actually have stuff built around you. That will happen. And Jeff, I want Jeff to bring it.
Okay, well, I mean, we're going to have to close off fairly soon. I think what you've just described is a better ecosystem than the one that he's already built. In my view, Bezos is a genius, but he's not a retailer. He's the owner of an ecosystem that happens to be a really good functioning machine that has actually benefited a lot of human beings from a kind of convenience point of view and from a pricing point of view. He's never curated anything in his world. In fact, his whole business is not based on curation. It's almost based on the complete opposite. I guess what I'm talking about is there going to be ever again any curation? Is there ever going to be anyone in this world that is constantly throwing out new ideas and new products and new things? Anyone that says, there's a department store which is a lot of space that can be filled up with something that is my opinion of a something? Or is it just going to be, are they just going to die because they're not big enough?
No, yes, and definitely. The curation thing is what happens. I mean, Selfridges curates. Selfridges says all this stuff in here is cool, basically, doesn't it? I mean, what else does it say? Everything in there. You can reach in, blindfold, throw that, and you're safe because it's cool. This is what the Debenhams and the House of Fraser didn't do. They said you reach in and you get anything you want. It's a lucky dip, isn't it? It's that fucking lucky dip. You always got a piece of shit, people. So yes, and I'd say, you know, to go.
So you're not looking for a job with Debenhams, then?
No, I lose friends at every talk. The clients. But John Lewis, it occurs to me, is exactly the same. They say everything in here isn't cool, it's sensible. Everything in here is well built. Everything you can reach in blindfold and pull something out. And do you know what? It might not accept the world alike, but it's bloody good quality. That's what they do. So that is curation. And yet, and at local level, we're going to have much more of that stuff. You know, local brands and young blood entrepreneurs bringing new things. That's curation. So yes, I know that's the awful word, curate, but yes, of course, selecting stuff, because otherwise this just has everything on it, everything, and we need curation.
All right, well, Howard, look, it's been fun, and look, I really appreciate your time. I think we're probably going to have to sign off now and see whether we can get anything out of this edit.
Yeah, see if you can edit something sensible out of that. Would be really helpful.
We'll have to curate this conversation.
Yes, it'd be redacted down to about 3.5 minutes.
Yeah, I've got my pink pen out ready for that.
Good to see
mate,
you,
it's been real fun. All right, mate, take care.
Okay, thanks
a
Mark.
lot. Appreciate it. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Reinventing Normal. Next time we're speaking to Barbara Thau about local, and if the rebirth of community is simple common sense. We'll be getting under the skin of what it will take to make local special again, and how this can be monetized for commerce and community alike. So until then, I'll leave you with the question: what normal would you reinvent?